Uh, Adolf Reed, who's one of the people who's almost always accused of class reductionism, when some socialists warn about the dangers of class reductionism, has defined it this way in his essay where he's denying that it applies to him. He says, class reductionism is the supposed view that inequalities apparently attributable to race, gender, or other categories of group identification are either secondary in importance or reducible to generic economic inequality. It thus follows, according to those who hurl the charge, that specifically anti-racist, feminist, or LGBTQ concerns, for example, should be dissolved within demands for economic redistribution. Okay, now, that's a fairly clear definition, and he argues convincingly in the essay that that doesn't apply to him. In fact, it doesn't apply to anybody he knows, right? There are probably 5 people on Reddit it applies to, but that's about it. Go to Cosarelli and wrap up with her, because she's very clear on why she thinks that her targets. So that's the Jacobin wing of the DSA, but it's not just them, right? They're the example in her title. She also says Bernie Sanders is a class reductionist, and Bernie Sanders, former press secretary and current affairs contributor, I think maybe editor, Brianna Joy Gray. Nathan Robinson's the main editor. She might be a contributing editor or something. I'm not 100% sure about her title. But Cosarelli says Bernie Sanders, Brianna Joy Gray, and I guess various Jacobin writers who are in DSA are class reductionists. And the specific reason that she gives is that all of these people aren't on board with the demand for racially targeted reparations, but instead they say that the best way to help close the economic gap between white people and those black and brown people who are hit hardest by current capitalist structures is through universal demand.
Oh my god, here we go with the black and brown shit. Reparations is not a conversation about black and brown. Reparations is a conversation about American chattel slavery and the people who descend from those slaves who have been forced to go through black hole laws, peonage, convict leasing, segregation, redlining, on and on and on and on. So the targets of that have been black people who descend from those slaves. Now that we got that out the way, let's talk about this pivot already. See, the goal is to resolve the racial discrimination that has been going on for centuries. But they like to take that and swap it out for poverty. It's a quick little bait and switch they do to make the conversation about class. And this is why people call them class reductionists. But they think that they're just doing some magical shit with words that removes them from that category. So, yes, we're talking about compensating black people for centuries of racial discrimination. The poverty is a byproduct of that discrimination. So we're solving for the discrimination. We're not solving for the poverty. And no one seems to ask these people, like, okay, so for the motherfuckers who are still alive, who literally experience segregation and redlining and all types of shit that has been going on in our modern American history. Let's say those motherfuckers went through that shit firsthand, but they did come out on the other side financially successful or okay, or something that is not necessarily poverty. Are we saying to these motherfuckers that they don't deserve anything for that racial discrimination, but we plan to actually do some type of program like for that discrimination? Like, it doesn't make sense what the fuck they're saying. They just want to sidestep the race issue and do a poverty program. Poverty programs are great, but this is not a solution for centuries of racial discrimination. And they don't want to have an intellectually honest conversation about that.
Here's the thing about that this is not an argument about whether racial disparities are symptoms of injustice or important, or whether the history of de jure racial apartheid going through slavery and into Jim Crow and FHA redlining that led to those economic disparities is important. Right? Everybody involved in this debate thinks that all of that stuff is important. Nobody involved thinks that that the disparities between white and black Americans economically are a result of happenstance within a basically fair market system, or culture or bad choices or any of that nonsense. Right? Everybody thinks that there's a pretty straight line from those historical factors to current disparities. The question that we're arguing about is, given that, what's the best way to end those disparities? What's the best strategy?
And to them, the best solution is to look at those racial disparities, take race out of the whole discussion, and then do something for class disparities. They don't want to talk about the history. They want to remove the history from the discussion. And the whole game is to never actually talk about solving racial discrimination or racial injustice. It's always to pivot to class. The only reason any of these motherfuckers talk about race is to use race as a mascot for their poverty programs. They don't give a fuck about racial injustice.
And I think a good analogy, right? It's kind of a goofy analogy. There are lots and lots of ways in which these two situations are not like each other, but an analogy that trains our focus on the analytically important distinction here is this. So think about the relationship between black poverty and poverty by members of other racial groups in the United States by analogy to a serial killer who's got a bunch of people trapped in his basement. And let's say this particular serial killer really, really hates Asian people, and he tries to target Asian people whenever possible. So the 10 people trapped in his basement, 6 of them are Asian, 4 of them are white or black. And the 6 Asian people got into the basement because they were specifically targeted because of his anti-Asian animus. Maybe one of the other 4, saw him kidnap one of the Asian people, so he kidnapped him, so he wouldn't be a witness. Maybe the other 3 were just in the wrong place at the wrong time and targets of opportunity. Regardless, the point that's important here is that right now they're all in the basement. Right now they all need exactly the same thing, which is to get out of the basement. Right now, the best way of getting all of them out of the basement, and again, the basement here is poverty, right? That if we're talking about the economic disparities, this analogy applies. Now,
we are talking about an economic disparity that came about because of centuries of racial injustice. So if you're going to use an analogy like this, then the basement has to be racial injustice. That's what the basement has to be based on, because that's the fucking experience that got us here. We're not in this situation because a capitalist owned the factory and we didn't get our equal share of the money or the wealth that was created from our labor. That's not why we're in this situation. We were excluded from all of that. We are in this situation because of segregation. We're in this situation because of redlining. We're in this situation because of slavery. We're in this situation because of things that other groups did not experience. And these other groups, if we're going to talk about the natives, let's talk about the Indian Claims Commission of 1946, where a lot of them received payouts. Let's talk about like Obama and Biden giving them $3 billion. Let's talk about how the Japanese received reparations. So if we're saying that the descendants of slaves are in that fucking basement, then we have to be honest and say that we've let everyone out of that goddamn basement except for those people. And as I've been explaining, the poverty is a byproduct of the racial injustice. So in this analogy, poverty would take the place of something that's happening to us in this basement, such as like physical abuse or starvation. Our problem is being in that fucking basement. Now, yes, starvation is happening to us. Yes, physical abuse is happening to us. But our issue is being in that basement. And what you're telling us is that you can't get us out of that fucking basement until you solve physical abuse in the whole nation, or you solve starvation in the whole fucking nation. So the only way I can get out this fucking basement is if it benefits people outside of the fucking basement. Wait. What am I even saying? That's not even the truth of the matter. In fact, because you're not even talking about getting us out of the basement. You're talking about just stopping the starvation and the physical abuse and leaving us in the fucking basement.
The much reviled Adolph Reed has a good article about this in Common Dreams right now that he co-wrote with Walter Ben Michaels, in which he points out that, it, quote, "It is practically impossible to imagine a serious strategy for winning the kinds of reforms that would actually improve black and brown working people's conditions without winning them for all working people, and without doing so through a struggle anchored to broad working class solidarity."
So in other words, the working class is telling black people that we're on our fucking own in regards to the issues that we care about. But we need to fucking capitulate and compromise every fucking thing that we go through to benefit other motherfuckers who don't give a shit about us. They need to cut the bullshit and be honest, because when they're talking about working class solidarity, they are talking about including us. We are excluded from that conversation, just like how it was back in the day when you had these labor movements that used to go on strikes to try to push black people out of fucking employment. But they don't want to have that real conversation. They don't want to talk about how fucking unions used to beat up motherfucking black employees to chase them off of fucking jobs.
In other words, the problem with the demand for racially targeted reparations is, A, it's going to be a lot less politically effective. There's much less chance of building a broad majoritarian movement for it than one based on economic gains for everybody in the working class that you could fight for on the basis of everybody's self-interest.
They didn't say this to the natives. They didn't say this to the Japanese. They only say this shit to us. And these are the leftists. These are supposed to be our allies. And they only play this game with us because they see us as suckers. And we got to stop playing along with them, especially since we don't gain anything from it. These are some of the most losingest motherfuckers in all of politics. But they talk like they have the master plan to win it all. If they knew what they were doing, why aren't they already winning? Like they need us, but they talk to us like we need them. They are dead in the water without us. If we don't support them, they don't have any path forward.
And two, even if we did somehow achieve them, that would still leave a bunch of people in that serial killer's basement.
So they can't do reparations for slavery, black code laws, peonage convict leasing, exclusion from FHA subsidies, exclusion from the GI Bill, Jim Crow, redlining, mass incarceration, on and on. They can't do reparations for that shit because there are other people in America who are poor. Not other people who have gone through segregation, not other people who have gone through some of the things that I've listed. but because they might be poor. And this is supposed to be their argument that is going to unify everyone, but I don't think they even include you in that unity. Because why is this an argument that should appeal to any black person? What fucking sense does this fucking make?